The Hitchhiker. To truly grasp the significance of my tale, it is essential to understand who I am. So let me provide you with a glimpse into my background. I came into the world in 1954, growing up during the transformative era of the 1960s and the early 1970s. I was born in a tiny town in upstate Ohio. When I say small, I mean a town with just a single traffic light at the intersection of Broadway and Main. Within the town center, there were approximately 40 businesses. One of the corners housed a drugstore soda shop, while other establishments included a hardware store, a small grocery store, Ben Franklin's variety store, a gas station, and a barber shop. The community boasted Baptist, Methodist, Lutheran, and Catholic churches, with most residents attending religious services regularly. It was a picturesque setting, akin to the idyllic town of Mayberry. Among the town's buildings were a library, a post office, and also a jail. The layout of the jail was such that you could easily sneak past the officer's desk 9 times out of 10 to check if anyone was incarcerated. And if there happened to be someone in jail, we mischievous kids would run errands for them, fetching cigarettes or whatever they really needed. We never bothered to ask about their crimes, displaying our youthful ignorance. During my formative years, I was an inquisitive and free-spirited child, full of innocence and wildness. As time passed, momentous events unfolded around me. JFK's assassination, the civil rights movement, the Vietnam protest, and even the rise of the hippie revolution, which I wholeheartedly embraced, becoming one of its earliest advocates. During those years, hitchhiking was a common practice, and I took full advantage of that. Sometimes, I traveled with friends, while other times, I ventured alone. I set out with no money, minimal clothing, and a carefree attitude. Many people tried to warn me about the dangers, but being young and naive, feeling invincible, I shrugged off their well-intentioned advice. This particular trip I'm about to recount was neither my first, nor was it my last, but it remains etched in my memory as the most unforgettable one. It will elucidate the gravity of the close call I experienced. It was 1969 in June, and at the age of 14, I spent the night at my friend Dina's house in a neighboring town. I convinced her to join me on a journey to San Francisco. Coincidentally, she had brought a brother living there whom she hadn't seen in a while, so we set off, trudging across cow pastures to reach the highway. Of course, there, we stuck out our thumbs, and as you can imagine, it didn't take long to secure a ride. We hopped into several cars, accepting rides from various strangers. At one point, a band's tour bus even offered us a lift to their gig in Chicago, but we declined, not wanting to deviate that far from our intended destination. I wish I could recall what band it was. I vividly remember another ride when we hopped into a convertible Cadillac with 4 black men who took us to a lively party in Columbus, Ohio. We were probably the only white people there. Surprisingly, we felt welcomed and safe throughout the entire event, and in fact, a kind lady living in the apartment gave me a t-shirt, which I initially thought was a gesture of kindness. As an adult, I now realize she was trying to cover me up. God bless her. Then, there was another ride that began well until the driver picked up another hitchhiker. This was a lone guy who incessantly nagged him about the consequences of transporting 2 underage girls across state lines. Irritated by his remarks, I told him to shut up. We should have disembarked right then and there, but we decided to stay. While the hitchhiker was more annoying than dangerous, The situation was far from ideal. Eventually, the driver stopped for gas in Iowa, and Dina and I went to a restroom to freshen up. Upon emerging, we were startled to find the police waiting for us. Before long, we found ourselves in the Iowa City Jail. Although I don't recall the immediate aftermath, I'm certain our parents were contacted promptly. We became quite the spectacle in that small jail. The officers would engage us in conversation, play cards with us, bring cigarettes to us, candy, donuts. Felt like another version of Mayberry. Our stay in jail was relatively brief. Dina's mother drove out to pick us up, and after conversing with her daughter, she made the extraordinary decision to drive us the rest of the way to California. That was a journey of over 1,900 miles. Unbelievable. I remember singing along to the radio as we traveled, with the radio playing San Francisco, "Be Sure to Wear Your Flowers in Your Hair" by the Mamas and the Papas. It felt like the anthem of our adventure. Later, we checked into a hotel in Reno, which turned out to be far from the exhilaration I'd anticipated. It was downright boring. Frustrated, I tried to persuade Dina to abandon her mother and escape with me, a terrible and selfish notion that, in retrospect, would have caused immense pain and devastation. Fortunately, she refused, and I acquiesced. So, we continued our journey from there. Finally, we arrived in San Francisco, right at the heart of the action, near Berkeley College, where the hippie culture thrived. Dina's mother accompanied us throughout the stay. The whole experience overwhelmed me. While I'd considered myself fairly cool in our small town, this was an entirely different league. As I mentioned earlier, my naivety prevented me from fully understanding things like drug addiction, but I witnessed it firsthand in the park. Seeing countless individuals consumed by drugs frightened me to my core. There were other sights I witnessed, but I can't mention. Needless to say, I was shocked, yearning to return home, and I've never had the desire to go back to California since then. I can't recall the exact duration of that particular adventure, but soon after, I found myself at home watching TV with my mother. It was July, and news of the Manson families and their heinous murders dominated the airwaves. In that moment, I realized how narrowly I'd escaped their clutches and potentially became one of their victims. What if I had ventured off alone in search of that adventure, instead of staying with Dina and her mother that night? What if I had hitchhiked alone through the desert, 9 hours away from the Spawn Ranch? What if that hitchhiker hadn't reported us to the Iowa police, leaving just the two of us stranded there? Most certainly, one or both of us would have been picked up by the Manson family. Later, I learned that the family had been recruiting individuals from Haight-Ashbury. I also recall how annoyed I was that we couldn't shake off Dina's mom. Every day, I'm filled with gratitude that I didn't get entangled in that dark web. I was ripe for the picking, especially if they found me before I made it to California. To think that hitchhiking could have possibly led me to the hands of the Manson family is something I'll never forget. While it is worthwhile to have that freedom and experience of living on your own, it's not worthwhile to do it and end up in the hands of something much more sinister. The Manson family preyed on people like me. Back then, I was just as naive as I could be, and easily could have become involved in them. As annoyed as I was of my friend's mother, she very much saved our lives that time, and I can't thank her enough for it, because without her, I could have ended up on the news just like those people.